You want to know the one specific thing that actually makes a narcissist offer an apology. This is the same individual who, not so long ago, looked you in the eye and told you that your pain simply was not real. It is not about begging them to understand you. It is not about spending hours trying to explain your perspective so they finally see the light. It is something far quieter, much more understated, and significantly more powerful. Because the moment you put this into practice, you will notice their ironclad certainty beginning to crack, their unwavering confidence stumbling, and they will suddenly come back to you with the absolute closest thing to accountability that they are capable of offering. Before I break down exactly how to maintain these boundaries without accidentally slipping back into those old familiar patterns, make sure you hit that follow button and stay right here with me. This next part is where everything finally makes sense. You have to understand that narcissists do not apologize out of genuine empathy because empathy is not the engine that powers their relationships. What actually drives them is a constant need for supply, attention, validation, power, admiration, and control. When a narcissist hurts you, they are not sitting there evaluating the emotional impact on your life or your heart. Instead, they are evaluating the impact that the situation has on themselves. They are asking, did this hurt threaten my image? Did it threaten my comfort, my easy access to what I want, or my carefully constructed sense of superiority? If the answer to those questions is no, then there is absolutely no internal motivation for them to feel even a shred of remorse. Their internal emotional wiring is designed to prioritize self-preservation over genuine human connection. That is exactly why they can walk away from your pain with such astonishing, chilling coldness. But the dynamic shifts the moment the consequences of their behavior start to personally inconvenience them. If you choose to withdraw your attention, stop engaging in circular arguments, stop trying to make them understand your feelings, and remove the emotional energy that once fed them, they experience a major disruption in their supply. That disruption is what wakes them up, not any sudden spark of compassion. This is why their apologies almost always appear only when their access to you is clearly threatened, when you become unavailable, or when their tight grip on control starts to slip away. They begin realizing that their behavior now carries a tangible cost. And above all else, narcissists truly hate paying emotional costs. Their version of an apology is purely transactional. It is a calculated strategy to regain their sense of equilibrium, not an authentic expression of understanding or regret. When the environment around them changes and you are no longer acting as the emotional cushion they have always relied upon, they perceive a genuine risk. That risk might be losing you, losing the admiration they crave, losing their stability, or losing the image they have worked so hard to maintain. To counter that risk, they may offer something that looks like accountability. Please realize they are not suddenly discovering empathy. They are simply attempting to restore a benefit they are terrified of losing. This is exactly why the calm, deliberate withdrawal of your energy affects them so much more deeply than any emotional confrontation. Your lack of reaction highlights the undeniable fact that they are losing influence over you. And for someone who survives entirely on control and the attention of others, that loss is completely intolerable. The apology that emerges is simply their method for recovering the equilibrium that benefits them the most. Your emotional withdrawal is significantly more powerful than confrontation because narcissists are fueled by intense emotional responses, not by emotional understanding. When you confront them with your anger, your tears, your detailed explanations, or your desperate pleas for change, you might believe you are effectively communicating your pain. But from their perspective, all they see is engagement. Engagement means that they still matter to you. It means they still influence you, and they still live rent-free in your emotional landscape. This is the definition of supply, and it keeps them energized. Even your negative emotions serve as confirmation that they still hold the reins. But emotional withdrawal creates an entirely different reality, one that they are not equipped to navigate. When you stop reacting, when your voice remains calm and measured, when you stop trying to convince them of your truth, the entire system they rely on starts to collapse. You are no longer acting as a predictable source of validation or emotional stimulation. You become neutral, and neutrality is their kryptonite. Emotional withdrawal is not about giving them the silent treatment or trying to punish them. It is simply about stepping out of the role they have always expected you to play. Instead of pleading, you become factual. Instead of exhausting yourself with explanations, you become concise. Instead of getting pulled into an argument, you preserve your own boundaries and your own energy. This deprives them of the drama cycle that keeps them feeling superior or in charge. Narcissists require emotional reactions to maintain their psychological dominance. They provoke you just to keep you off balance. They criticize you just to make you feel the need to defend yourself. They use guilt trips just to make you feel the need to explain your actions. When you emotionally withdraw, you effectively deny them access to the reactions that feed their sense of power. This withdrawal forces them into a very uncomfortable position. Suddenly, they are not able to read you. They cannot predict how you will respond to their usual tricks. They cannot pull you back in with their rehearsed guilt, their temporary charm, or their intimidation. They cannot trigger you into a fight. Your calm demeanor becomes genuinely unsettling because narcissists interpret a lack of emotion as a lack of control. They start questioning whether they are finally losing their grip on you, and that underlying fear pushes them into behaviors they would normally resist, including offering an apology. They do this to reestablish an emotional connection, not because they have finally had an epiphany about your pain. Your emotional distance signals that they are no longer impacting you the way they have in the past. And that loss of influence becomes the pressure that compels them to act differently. Boundaries only work when they are backed by consistent, unwavering action. Because narcissists do not respond to words, they do not respond to your emotions, and they certainly do not respond to promises. They only respond to outcomes. You can state a boundary 100 times, but if you continue to tolerate the behavior, the boundary becomes absolutely meaningless. Narcissists test limits relentlessly. They watch you very carefully to see whether your no is actually real or whether it can be pushed, guilted, manipulated, or emotionally worn down until you finally give in. The moment they see any inconsistency, they interpret it as permission to keep going. This is the reason why boundaries with a narcissist must be firm, calm, and consistently enforced. Otherwise, they become opportunities for further exploitation rather than tools for your protection. When you back a boundary with real action, you shift the entire dynamic from emotional negotiation to an undeniable reality. Instead of trying to convince them why their behavior hurt you, you simply change how you respond to that behavior. If they start yelling, you calmly leave the room. If they try to insult you, you end the conversation immediately. If they cross a limit, you have clearly stated you reduce the contact or the access they have to you. The key to all of this is follow through. Narcissists push because they expect you to break. When you refuse to break, you disrupt their entire internal map of how they intend to control you. Consistency becomes the shock that cracks their sense of entitlement because it shows them, perhaps for the first time, that their usual tactics are no longer effective. Consistent boundaries also change you for the better. You stop reacting from a place of fear, guilt, or old, painful emotional patterns. You start acting from a place of self-respect. This creates a stable environment where you no longer reward their bad behavior with your precious attention, your emotional explanations, or your engagement. Narcissists are not used to this kind of stability. They are used to chaos cycles where they provoke, you react, and then they regain control. A consistent boundary breaks that cycle entirely. They eventually realize that certain actions will lead to real, unavoidable consequences. Whether that means distance, silence, reduced access, or the loss of the influence they depend on, the shift is palpable. This realization can push them into offering apologies or making temporary adjustments, not because they truly grasp the weight of your boundary, but because your consistency introduces a significant cost to their behavior. Boundaries backed by action force them to recognize that you are no longer the person they can easily manipulate or pull back into those old, destructive patterns. A narcissist's biggest fear is losing their access to you, losing the admiration they crave, or losing their influence over you, because these elements are the very foundation of their identity and their emotional survival. To them, relationships are not emotional connections. They are resources. You are a source of validation, attention, admiration, or utility. When that resource feels secure, they feel powerful. When that resource feels threatened, their entire internal world begins to destabilize. This is why they often behave in ways that seem arrogant, dismissive, or cruel. They just assume that you will always stay, always forgive, always explain, and always tolerate their behavior. They rely on your emotional investment because it guarantees their sense of superiority and control. The moment that investment becomes uncertain, they feel a deep sense of panic that they will never admit to. Losing access means they no longer have an emotional or practical hold over you. Losing admiration means they are not being seen as special or superior. Losing influence means their ability to shape your emotions and reactions is fading away. These losses attack their very identity, because narcissists are entirely dependent on external validation to maintain their incredibly fragile self-worth. They are simply unable to generate stability internally. Everything they are depends on the attention they extract from others. When you stop engaging emotionally, when you detach, and when you stop responding the way you used to, you trigger their intense fear of becoming irrelevant. This fear often leads them to shift their tactics. They may suddenly become apologetic, overly kind, or dramatically attentive. They may even try to replay the early idealization phase to pull you back into their web. Their apology is not rooted in guilt or empathy. It is rooted in fear. They sense that your emotional distance could evolve into physical distance, and that physical distance could evolve into a total loss of access. They apologize to resecure their position, to keep the supply flowing, and to ensure they still have a place in your mind and in your life. This is a recurring cycle, and understanding it is your path to freedom. By remaining consistent and keeping your energy for yourself, you are no longer playing their game. You are changing the rules entirely. Their fear of losing influence is precisely the reason they react so intensely when you start to show independence, groundedness, or real self-respect. To them, these traits act as glaring warning signs that you might be slipping out from under their emotional control. When they feel their supply of admiration and their easy access to you are being threatened, an internal alarm goes off. It pushes them to do whatever they feel is necessary to regain their position, and that includes those rare moments when they offer an apology, though you should remember this is done purely out of self-preservation. Calm detachment is significantly more destabilizing to a narcissist than showing anger ever could be, simply because narcissists thrive on emotional volatility and the predictable reactions they get from you. When you respond with anger, hurt, or frustration, you are still feeding their system, even if it feels like you are standing up to them. Every display of emotion, whether it is righteous outrage or desperate pleading, confirms to them that they still have significant influence over your state of mind. They interpret your emotional intensity as proof that they still matter, that they still hold a position of control, and that the drama cycle they rely on is still functioning exactly as expected. While anger might feel cathartic, it usually just escalates the conflict, and it rarely produces any real, lasting change because it is still operating within the rules of their game, a game they designed specifically to keep you reacting. Calm detachment, on the other hand, effectively breaks all those rules. When you detach with a calm demeanor, you stop providing the predictable reactions that narcissists rely on to manipulate, provoke, or dominate you. You create a void in the interaction that they are not equipped to fill. Their usual bag of tricks, provocation, blame, guilt, and charm suddenly stops working because all of those tactics depend on you giving them a response. Without that response, the patterns that maintain their sense of superiority begin to falter. They start to feel confused and deeply unsettled because the control they once took for granted is no longer there. Your calm is unsettling because it signals that their influence is waning, that their emotional leverage has become ineffective, and that the dynamic they have always relied on has fundamentally shifted. Please understand that calm detachment is not the same thing as being passive. It is a form of highly strategic engagement. It communicates that you are still present in the relationship, but that you are no longer accessible for their manipulation. You maintain your boundaries and your personal dignity without providing any fuel for them to escalate the situation. Narcissists find this incredibly destabilizing because they are not used to meeting resistance that does not provoke them emotionally. They are forced to confront the actual consequences of their behavior in a way that your anger could never accomplish. When they recognize that their tried and true strategies are failing, they often feel a sudden pressure to adjust their tactics, try to negotiate, or even offer an apology. Again, this is not out of genuine empathy, but because your calm removes the advantage they once held over you. This approach shifts the power dynamic quietly but with great effect. It demonstrates that their emotional manipulation no longer works, that your access is now conditional, and that their overall influence is limited. By choosing calm detachment over emotional confrontation, you destabilize the narcissist in a way that often triggers self-reflection and corrective behavior, all while you successfully preserve your own peace of mind. You cannot teach a narcissist to have empathy, but you can certainly change the equation by changing your own behavior. Because narcissists operate from a place of self-interest and require constant external validation rather than any kind of internal moral reflection, their emotional framework is simply not designed to process the pain they cause others in a meaningful or compassionate way. Confronting them directly with exactly how their actions have hurt you is very unlikely to result in any real understanding or remorse. They might nod, pretend to agree with you, or even mimic empathy just to keep control, but genuine emotional resonance is rarely possible. Instead of exhausting yourself trying to create empathy where there is none, the most effective strategy is to alter the dynamics that make their behavior effective in the first place. By changing how you respond, you essentially take away the tools they rely on, forcing them to operate differently if they want to maintain any access or influence over you. This means removing the emotional reactions that previously gave them all the power. It means enforcing your boundaries consistently so that every violation has tangible, real-world consequences. It means refusing to justify, explain, or defend yourself in ways that feed their sense of superiority. By doing this, you shift the balance of power from them directly to you. The narcissist may not feel remorse in the traditional sense, but they will experience real discomfort, frustration, and a deep sense of loss when their usual strategies stop working. That discomfort is what triggers an apology or a desperate attempt to adjust their behavior, not any newfound empathy. Changing your own behavior also communicates clearly that your emotional and psychological well-being is your highest priority. It signals that their ability to manipulate or exploit you is now limited and conditional. They are forced to face the reality that the old patterns no longer work and that you will no longer provide the responses they rely on. In response, they may attempt reconciliation, offer a hollow apology, or make a temporary change, not because they have genuinely internalized the harm they caused, but because maintaining their desired position or access now requires a completely different approach. By focusing on your own consistent actions, your ability to detach, and your dedication to self-protection, you create an environment where their behavior is no longer left unchecked. This approach does not rely on changing who they are deep down, but it changes the way they interact with you on the surface. Your choices dictate the new rules of engagement, compelling them to respond in ways that respect your boundaries and your safety. Even if empathy is entirely absent from the equation, accountability mirrors force narcissists to see their own behavior because they usually operate in a world shaped by self-deception, constant rationalization, and projection. They rarely, if ever, confront the true reality of how their actions affect others unless it directly threatens their own self-interest. A mirror in this sense is not a tool for emotional confrontation or moralizing. It is a reflection of consequences, boundaries, and patterns that they cannot easily manipulate or ignore. When you hold up an accountability mirror, you show them exactly what they are doing in a clear, unemotional way without giving them the usual fuel of your reactive emotions. You reflect the behavior, not the emotion. And this reflection is incredibly difficult for them to dismiss because it operates entirely outside the chaotic back and forth they are used to controlling. Narcissists are deeply accustomed to creating narratives that serve their self-image, often bending the facts, blaming others, and rationalizing their actions to make themselves look like the hero or the victim. An accountability mirror exposes a truth they cannot easily twist because it is tied to real consequences or consistent, measured responses. It might be something as simple as consistently leaving a conversation the moment your boundaries are crossed, keeping clear documentation of repeated patterns of hurtful behavior, or calmly pointing out the glaring discrepancies between their words and their actual actions. This form of reflection completely disrupts their usual control mechanisms because it provides clarity without any emotional reactivity, which is something they simply cannot dominate through their usual charm, manipulation, or guilt. When narcissists encounter these accountability mirrors, they experience deep cognitive dissonance. The gap between their carefully crafted self-perception and the harsh reality of their actions becomes impossible to ignore. They may initially react defensively, try to deny what you are saying, or attempt to redirect the blame back onto you, but you must remain firm. This is the moment where the cracks begin to show, and it is the moment where their behavior begins to change, because they realize they can no longer hide behind their illusions. You are no longer their audience, and you are no longer their puppet. You are simply holding up the light so they can see the reality of what they are doing. This is the most powerful position you can take.